The diner had seen better days. Its checkered linoleum floor was scuffed from decades of shuffling feet, and the metal edges of the counters had dulled under the weight of countless elbows and coffee cups. Yet there was something comforting about the place. The aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon greeted customers like an old friend, and the jukebox by the door played a soft hum of country tunes. Ruby Carter leaned against the counter, absently rubbing her aching feet. Her apron was stained with coffee spills and a streak of ketchup from the breakfast rush, but she wore it like a badge of honor. The diner wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. It gave her purpose, even if the tips barely covered her bills. She glanced out at the dining room, taking a moment to catch her breath. That's when she saw them, a young family sitting in a corner booth near the window. Something about them caught her eye. The father, a man in his 30s with a tired face and work-worn hands, stared at the menu as though it held more questions than answers. His wife sat beside him, cradling a baby in one arm while trying to settle a restless toddler in the other. Their clothes were clean but threadbare, the kind of outfits chosen out of necessity rather than style. Ruby grabbed a notepad and made her way over, adjusting her smile as she approached. "Good morning, folks," she said, her tone warm and inviting. "What can I get you to drink?" The man looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten where he was. "Just water, please," he said, his voice low. Ruby's gaze flicked to the mother, who offered a tight, apologetic smile. "Same for me," she murmured. Ruby nodded, scribbling in her pad even though she didn't need to. She had worked at the diner long enough to recognize the signs. The hesitation, the quiet exchange of glances, the way the man's hand lingered near his pocket, as though checking what little cash he had. When she returned with their waters, the man ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu, a small plate of scrambled eggs and toast. Ruby hesitated, waiting to see if they'd order anything else, but the man shook his head. "That'll be all for now," he said. Ruby's heart ached as she walked back to the kitchen. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a family in need, but something about this one tugged at her. Maybe it was the way the father's shoulders sagged under the weight of unspoken worries, or the way the toddler had asked for pancakes in a hopeful, sing-song voice only to be gently told, "Not today, sweetheart." In the kitchen, Ruby prepared their order herself. She wasn't supposed to, but she added an extra slice of bacon and a small side of fruit to the plate. She hoped it would go unnoticed by the cook. When she brought the food to their table, the man looked up at her, surprised. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ruby smiled. "Enjoy," she said simply. The family ate in near silence. The parents focused on keeping the children calm. Ruby busied herself with other tables but kept glancing at them, her chest tightening with every bite they took. She could see the careful way they divided the food. The father quietly giving his portion of bacon to the toddler while pretending he wasn't hungry. When the meal was done, the man pulled out a worn leather wallet and began counting crumpled bills. Ruby noticed the tension in his jaw as he realized he didn't have enough for both the meal and a tip. He looked toward her, his face flushed with embarrassment. Ruby didn't wait for him to speak. She walked over, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. The man blinked up at her. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I know," Ruby replied, smiling. "But I want to." The mother's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Thank you." Ruby waved it off as if it were nothing, though her own heart was full. As the family gathered their things to leave, the little girl turned back and waved at her, a wide smile lighting up her face. Later that evening, as Ruby counted her tips by the register, she realized she had barely made enough to cover her gas for the week. Her stomach sank, but she pushed the thought aside. It was worth it, she told herself. She didn't know it yet, but that small gesture of kindness had set something in motion, something that would change her life forever. The next morning, Ruby arrived at the diner just as the sun peeked over the horizon, bathing the parking lot in soft golden light. She tied her apron around her waist, readying herself for another day of endless coffee refills and grease-stained order pads. The early shift was usually quiet, with a handful of regulars sipping coffee and reading newspapers. Ruby relished these calm hours, but today, her mind wandered back to the family from the day before. She couldn't shake the memory of the father's tired smile or the way the mother had whispered her thanks. As Ruby prepared a fresh pot of coffee, Carla, the diner's owner, appeared from the office. Carla was a stocky woman with sharp eyes and a heart of gold, though she rarely showed it outright. "Morning, Ruby," Carla said, her voice gruff but affectionate. "Delivery truck's running late again. Can you stock the shelves when it gets here?" "Of course," Ruby replied, flashing a smile. The hours drifted by. Ruby moved from table to table, greeting regulars with easy charm and exchanging small talk with travelers passing through town. Despite her usual cheer, a flicker of worry lingered in the back of her mind. Her rent was due soon, her car's brakes had started squealing, and she wasn't sure how she'd stretch her last paycheck to cover it all. She was clearing plates from a booth when she noticed a man in a sharp suit walk through the front door. He was out of place in the modest diner, his polished leather shoes clicking against the worn linoleum. Ruby glanced at him briefly, assuming he was a businessman passing through town. But when Carla spotted him, her expression shifted. She straightened her posture, setting down her coffee cup as if she were bracing for something important. "Can I help you?" Carla asked, her voice unusually formal. The man smiled warmly. "I'm Marcus Henderson. I believe you're expecting me." Ruby blinked, suddenly more interested. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Carla's face lit up in recognition. Right. Welcome, Mr. Henderson," she gestured toward her office. "Let's talk in here." Ruby went back to wiping down a table, pretending not to eavesdrop as the two disappeared into the back. She was sure Marcus Henderson must be someone important, maybe a new supplier or a health inspector, but she had no reason to think it had anything to do with her. That assumption changed 10 minutes later when Marcus stepped out of the office and scanned the dining area. His gaze landed on Ruby, and he walked toward her with purpose. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but direct. "Are you Ruby Carter?" Ruby froze, caught off guard. Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Marcus smiled, his expression softening. "I think you already have." Ruby frowned, unsure what he meant. Carla emerged from the office, her face a mix of curiosity and pride. "Ruby, Mr. Henderson is the CEO of the restaurant group that owns this diner," she explained. Ruby's stomach flipped. She had worked at the diner for years but had never thought about the corporate side of things, let alone met anyone from the top. "It's nice to meet you," she said, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "I understand you paid for a family's meal yesterday," Marcus said, his voice steady but kind. Ruby's cheeks flushed. "Oh, that it wasn't a big deal. They just looked like they needed a little help." Marcus studied her, his smile widening. "To you, it might not have been a big deal, but to them, it was everything. The father came to one of our offices this morning. He wanted to thank the waitress who showed his family kindness when they needed it most. He told me what you did." Ruby's heart raced. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone talk about it. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said quickly. "I know you didn't," Marcus replied. "That's what makes it so special." Ruby shifted on her feet, feeling both flattered and embarrassed. "I was just trying to do the right thing." "And you did," Marcus said firmly. "Which is why I'm here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp white envelope, handing it to her. "This is for you." Ruby hesitated before taking the envelope. She opened it cautiously, her breath catching when she saw the check inside. $10,000, she whispered, staring at the figure in disbelief. "It's a small token of appreciation," Marcus said. "Not just for what you did yesterday, but for the way you represent this diner and our company's values." Ruby's hands trembled as she set the envelope down. "I can't accept this," she said, shaking her head. "You can," Marcus insisted gently. "And you should. Use it to take care of yourself, to ease some of the burdens you've been carrying. You've spent so much time helping others, let someone help you for once." Tears pricked Ruby's eyes. She thought about her mounting bills, the car repairs she had been putting off, and the quiet dreams she had tucked away over the years. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to imagine a life with a little less struggle. As Marcus stood to leave, he paused and added, "One more thing. We're looking for someone to take on a leadership role in the company. After hearing your story and meeting you, I think you'd be perfect for it. If you're interested, let's talk more in the coming days." Ruby's jaw dropped. "Me? A leadership role?" Marcus nodded. "You have the heart, Ruby. That's the hardest thing to teach. Think about it." As he left the diner, Ruby sank into a booth, the envelope still clutched in her hands. She had started her shift like any other day, weighed down by her own worries, but now everything felt different. She didn't know where this new path might lead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel before. Hope. For the next few days, Ruby felt like she was walking through a dream. The check Marcus had given her sat on her kitchen table, untouched, as though cashing it might somehow make the moment less real. Her co-workers at the diner buzzed with excitement when they heard the news. Carla, in particular, couldn't hide her pride, boasting to anyone who would listen about her star waitress. "You've always been too good for this place," Carla said one evening as they closed up. "But I'm glad people are finally seeing it." Ruby laughed softly, trying to hide her nerves. "I don't know, Carla. Leadership role? I'm just a waitress. I don't even know where to start." Carla leaned on the counter, fixing Ruby with a sharp look. "You listen to me, Ruby Carter. I've watched you for years, running this place better than I ever could. You've got the heart, the smarts, and the grit. Don't sell yourself short." Despite Carla's encouragement, Ruby wrestled with doubts. Could she really leave the diner, the only place she'd ever felt truly at home? And what if she failed? She finally mustered the courage to call Marcus, her hands shaking as she dialed his number. When he picked up, his voice was warm and reassuring. "I'm so glad you called," Marcus said. "I was hoping you'd take me up on my offer. How about we meet for lunch tomorrow? We can go over the details." Ruby agreed, her stomach twisting into knots. The next day, she found herself sitting in a sleek downtown restaurant, worlds away from the diner's familiar charm. Marcus greeted her with a smile, and as they spoke, he outlined what the leadership role would entail. "You'd oversee a new initiative we're launching," Marcus explained. "We want to integrate community outreach into our company's mission programs that provide meals to families in need, like the one you helped. We're calling it Plates of Kindness." Ruby's eyes widened. "That sounds incredible," she said. "It is," Marcus agreed. "And we need someone who understands what it means to struggle and to care. Someone like you." Ruby felt both flattered and terrified. The job sounded meaningful, but it was a world she didn't know: budgets, team management, corporate strategy. "I don't have a business degree," she said, voicing her concerns. "I've never done anything like this before." "You don't need a degree to care about people," Marcus said firmly. "You've already shown you can lead, Ruby. The rest we can teach you." Over the next few weeks, Ruby shadowed Marcus and his team, learning everything she could about the new program. She attended meetings, drafted plans, and visited other diners to speak with employees and customers about how Plates of Kindness could make an impact. At first, Ruby felt out of place in the corporate environment. She was used to the hum of the kitchen, not the hum of fluorescent office lights. But as she saw the enthusiasm her ideas generated, her confidence grew. One day, during a brainstorming session, Marcus asked Ruby to present her vision for the program. She stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding, and shared her ideas, partnering with local shelters, creating donation-matching campaigns, and hosting community dinners at participating diners. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. "You're a natural," Marcus said as they left the meeting. "I told you this role was meant for you." Ruby couldn't deny it. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. But the long hours and steep learning curve were taking their toll. Late one evening, after another exhausting day, Ruby returned to the diner to unwind. The familiar sights and sounds instantly put her at ease. Carla was closing up, humming along to the jukebox. Back so soon, Carla teased, handing Ruby a coffee. I needed a break from spreadsheets and meetings, Ruby admitted, sinking into a booth. It's exciting, but it's overwhelming. I feel like I'm constantly playing catch up. Carla sat across from her, resting her elbows on the table. Let me tell you something, she said. Running a diner isn't all that different. You juggle orders, fix problems, and make people feel welcome. You're not just a waitress, Ruby, you're a problem solver. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Ruby smiled, the tension in her chest easing slightly. A week later, the pilot phase of Plates of Kindness launched in 5 locations, including Ruby's diner. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Families who had struggled in silence now had a place to turn for a warm meal and a friendly face. One afternoon, as Ruby walked through the diner to check on how things were running, she noticed a woman sitting at a table with 2 young children. Ruby's heart skipped a beat. It was the family she had helped weeks ago. The father stood and approached Ruby, a bouquet of flowers in his hands. I don't know if you remember us, he began, his voice shaking with emotion. Ruby smiled, her eyes already misting. Of course I do. We just wanted to thank you, he continued. What you did for us that day, it gave us hope when we had none. And now, with this program, you're helping so many more families like ours. You have no idea what it means. Ruby accepted the flowers, her throat tight with emotion. The little girl she remembered so vividly handed her a handmade card that read, "Thank you for being so nice." At that moment, Ruby knew she had made the right choice. She wasn't just helping people, she was part of something larger, something meaningful. As she watched the family sit down to enjoy their meal, Ruby felt a surge of pride and gratitude. This journey had pushed her out of her comfort zone, but it was worth it. The ripple of kindness she had started was growing into a wave, and Ruby couldn't wait to see how far it would go. The success of the Plates of Kindness pilot spread quickly, drawing attention from local news outlets and social media. Families shared heartfelt stories of how the program had touched their lives, and donations from businesses and community members began pouring in. Ruby found herself at the center of it all, balancing her new leadership role with her ongoing shifts at the diner. She insisted on staying connected to the ground level, believing that real change started with understanding people's day-to-day struggles. One evening, Marcus called Ruby with an update that both thrilled and terrified her. We've got approval to expand the program nationwide, he said. That means more locations, more partnerships, and a bigger team. You're going to be busier than ever. Ruby let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's amazing, she said, though the weight of the responsibility pressed against her chest. You're ready for this, Marcus assured her. And you're not doing it alone. We'll give you all the support you need. As the program grew, Ruby traveled to different states, meeting with employees and community leaders to share her vision. She spent long hours coordinating logistics, speaking at fundraisers, and refining the program's operations. But no matter how far she went, Ruby always returned to the diner that had been her foundation. It was during one of these visits that Carla pulled Ruby aside. You've been burning the candle at both ends, Carla said, her tone a mix of concern and admiration. Don't forget to take care of yourself. Ruby smiled, brushing off Carla's worry. I'll be fine, she said. There's too much to do. But Carla wasn't convinced. Listen, kiddo. I've been running this diner long enough to know when someone's heading for burnout. You've done so much already, don't let your fire burn out before the work is done. The warning stayed with Ruby, and she made a conscious effort to slow down. She started delegating tasks to her growing team, trusting others to share the load. It wasn't easy. Ruby had always been the type to carry everything herself, but she realized that true leadership meant empowering others. One evening, Ruby returned to her apartment after a particularly long day. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch, staring up at the ceiling. The exhaustion was bone deep, but so was her sense of purpose. She thought back to the little girl who had handed her that handmade card, to the family she had met at the community dinners, and to the countless lives that were now being touched by Plates of Kindness. The thought gave her strength. The next morning, Ruby arrived at the diner to find Carla waiting for her with a sly grin. "Got a surprise for you," Carla said, handing Ruby a cup of coffee. Ruby frowned. "A surprise?" "Out back," Carla said, gesturing toward the rear of the diner. Ruby followed her outside, where a small crowd of regular customers and employees had gathered. They stood beside a newly painted sign that read "Ruby's Place, Home of Plates of Kindness." Ruby's jaw dropped. What is this?" Carla stepped forward, her expression softening. "I've been thinking about retiring, Ruby. And when I do, I want you to take over the diner. You've already made it something special, something more than I ever dreamed it could be. This place belongs to you now." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "Carla, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take it," Carla said, smiling. Ruby laughed through her tears. "Okay, I'll take it." The announcement sparked another wave of excitement, and Ruby's Place became a flagship location for Plates of Kindness. The diner hosted monthly pay-what-you-can dinners, bringing together people from all walks of life. Local businesses donated supplies, volunteers pitched in to help serve, and families found a sense of belonging they hadn't felt in years. One night, as Ruby locked up the diner, she paused to look out at the empty tables and chairs. The quiet hum of the jukebox filled the room, and she thought about how far she had come from a struggling waitress to a leader making a difference on a national scale. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Marcus. "You won't believe this," he said, excitement in his voice. "A major national donor just pledged enough funding to support Plates of Kindness for the next 5 years. Ruby, we're going to reach every location in the country." Ruby gripped the phone tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "That's incredible, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's all because of you," Marcus said. "You started this." As Ruby ended the call, she leaned against the counter, letting the magnitude of it all wash over her. She thought about the family she had helped that day in the diner, how one small act of kindness had set off a chain of events she never could have imagined. The ripple had become a wave, and Ruby was ready to see how far it would carry her. Ruby's Place had become more than just a diner. It was a symbol of hope, a gathering place for the community, and the heart of the Plates of Kindness initiative. People from all over came to see where it all began, and Ruby found herself at the center of a movement that was changing lives across the nation. Despite her growing responsibilities, Ruby remained hands-on at the diner. She loved working the occasional shift, chatting with regulars, and hearing firsthand how the program had touched their lives. It grounded her, reminding her of the simple, human moments that had inspired it all. One rainy afternoon, as Ruby was preparing for another community dinner event, she noticed a familiar face walk through the door. It was the little girl from the family she had helped so many months ago, now older and taller, her hair tied back in a neat braid. Her parents followed closely behind, their expressions warm and grateful. "Miss Ruby," the girl said, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers, "we wanted to bring you this, to say thank you again." Ruby knelt to meet her gaze, her heart swelling. "You're so kind. These are beautiful." "Thank you." The girl smiled shyly. "You were kind first." Her father stepped forward, his voice steady but emotional. "You've changed everything for us. That meal gave us more than food, it gave us hope. And because of the program you started, we've been able to get back on our feet. I got a better job, and we're even volunteering now at a shelter near us. You inspired us to give back." Ruby's eyes filled with tears as she embraced them. The moment reminded her why she had taken on the challenges of leading the program, why she had poured so much of herself into this work. It wasn't just about feeding people, it was about creating a ripple of compassion that could transform lives. The evening's community dinner was a roaring success, with the diner packed wall to wall. Families laughed and shared stories, volunteers bustled between tables, and a local band played cheerful tunes in the corner. Marcus attended as well, standing quietly by the door, watching it all unfold with pride. After the event, Marcus approached Ruby, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her and said, "You've built something extraordinary here." Ruby smiled, leaning against the counter. I couldn't have done it without you. You've done more than create a program, Marcus said, his tone serious. You've created a legacy, one that will outlive both of us. Ruby looked around the diner, taking in the faces of the people who had come together, families, volunteers, regulars, and even strangers. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her work had made a tangible difference in so many lives. In the weeks that followed, Plates of Kindness reached even greater heights. National sponsorships flowed in, allowing the program to expand to every restaurant in the chain. Ruby traveled the country, speaking at conferences, meeting with community leaders, and sharing her vision for a world where no one had to go hungry. But no matter how far she traveled, Ruby always returned to Ruby's Place. It remained her home, her anchor. One sunny afternoon, as Ruby wiped down a booth, Carla walked in, now officially retired but still full of her characteristic sass. "Look at you," Carla said, gesturing to the bustling diner. "I always knew you'd do something big. But this is next level, kiddo." Ruby laughed, setting down her rag. "It's not just me. It's everyone who's been part of this, every volunteer, every donor, every person who believed in what we were doing." Carla grinned. "You're too modest. You started this whole thing with one act of kindness. Never forget that." Years later, Ruby stood outside the diner during a celebration marking the 5th anniversary of Plates of Kindness. A new sign had been erected above the door, bearing the words "Ruby's Place, where kindness grows." As Ruby looked out at the crowd of families, volunteers, and supporters who had gathered for the occasion, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She thought back to the moment she had paid for that family's meal, never imagining how it would change the trajectory of her life. In the distance, she saw the little girl who had once waved at her from the door of the diner. Now a young woman, she was helping to serve meals to guests. The sight brought a lump to Ruby's throat. Marcus approached, holding a glass of lemonade. "This isn't just a celebration of the program," he said, handing the glass to Ruby. "It's a celebration of you." Ruby shook her head, smiling. "It's a celebration of what kindness can do. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us, working together to make the world a little brighter." As the sun set and the crowd began to disperse, Ruby stood outside the diner, taking it all in. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but it had also been more rewarding than she could have ever imagined. The ripple of kindness she had started that day had grown into a wave, touching lives far and wide. And though the work was far from over, Ruby felt ready for whatever came next. Because kindness, she realized, wasn't just something you gave, it was something that came back to you multiplied, again and again,